Hey guys, my name is Matimio, and today I wanted to take a look at the new AR160 assault rifle that was introduced into Battlefield 4 and the recently nerfed L85A2. It was clear that DICE wanted to make these medium to long range weapons. They have the RPM to back it up, they have the stats to back up that type of play style, but I wanted to find out for myself, first of all, what the fuss was all about with the AR160. A lot of people are using it right now, but then just to compare and contrast why you would want to use one over the other and which is going to fit your type of play style for that medium to long range combat. And so to start things off, the AR160 has a rounds per minute of 700, and that is on the low end for the assault rifles. You can still do well up close, but you're going to be at a disadvantage. Like, as long as you get a couple of headshots, someone rounds the corner, you freak out, you get a couple of headshots in there, you can win that firefight. But because of that low RPM, this is the reason why it's meant for more medium to long range combat. And then as for the L85A2, it has a rounds per minute of 750. And this is actually where the nerf came in for this gun. It used to be at 800 RPM, which was just simply fantastic for its recoil and all of its other stats, but DICE decided that was a little bit too powerful and dropped it down to 750. And so while that's not a huge advantage over the AR160, you do have a little bit more horsepower at your disposal when you are using this weapon. As for their recoil numbers, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. The L85A2 has a vertical of 0.43, which is actually very high when you compare it to a lot of the assault rifles in the game, and then it has a left kick of 0.25 and a right of 0.25. As for the AR160, it also has a very similar type of recoil pattern, coming in with a vertical recoil of 0.5, which is very, very high, even higher than the L85A2, and a left kick of 0.2 and a right of 0.2. And so at least from the recoil patterns, I would say that the AR160 comes out on top. And you may be thinking to yourself, why is that? It has a higher vertical recoil. Well, in my opinion, vertical recoil is a lot easier to manage. Basically, all you have to do if you have a weapon that has no horizontal but a lot of vertical is just pull down on the weapon when you're firing, and the bullets are going to go exactly where you want them to go. But if a weapon has a crazy amount of horizontal but no vertical, it's almost impossible to try to predict where the weapon is going to bounce, and because of that, it makes it a lot harder to compensate for it, but also it makes the weapon a lot more inaccurate. And while I would not say that the L85A2 is an inaccurate weapon, like, it's still amazing at medium to long range combat, having that little bit more of horizontal, I would say, makes it a less appealing weapon compared to the AR160, at least with the recoil in mind. They also share the same type of damage model. They're both going to do 25 damage a shot up close, and then it's going to drop off to 18 at long range. But where we start to see a little bit more deviation is when we take a look at their reload speeds. The L85A2 has a surprisingly long reload time. Its short reload time, or if you still have a bolt in the chamber, is going to take you 2.75 seconds, which is very long for a short, and then its long reload time is going to take you 3.75 seconds to go through the entire animation. That is almost 4 seconds for an assault rifle, and if you get into some tight situations and you went through all of your rounds, that's going to mean the difference between life and death. Like, 3.75 seconds is a very lengthy reload time. But as for the AR160, it surprisingly has a very fast reload animation. It's only going to take you 2 seconds to go through the short and then 3.15 to go through the long. And so, at least with reload in mind, the AR160 is a beautiful weapon. Like, only 2 seconds to go through the short reload animation, and having a 700 RPM, which makes it very manageable to go through the short, is just a fantastic aspect of this weapon. And then the final couple of stats that they're going to be looking at is their magazine, which they both have 31, which is very standard for the assault rifles. And then what I should have mentioned before is that they both have a very low first shot recoil. They both have a first shot of 1.5 for the L85A2, and for the AR160, it has a first shot of 1.6. And really, this is where these weapons start to excel, because if you are trying to go for a target that's at a fair distance, maybe not 100 meters out, this isn't a bolt action rifle by any means, but if you see a target that's a good 50 to 40 meters away, you can tap fire them down no problem with these weapons. As long as you're not holding down the trigger for an extended period of time and you got that nice tap fire going, these weapons are going to be very accurate and you're not going to have to deal with a lot of first shot recoil. But now that we got all the stats out of the way, hopefully it is very apparent that these are meant for medium to long range combat. The stats back it up, the RPM backs it up, and while you can still do reasonably well up close and personal, don't get me wrong, I love running around with the L85A2 and just blazing people that just round the corner, getting a couple of headshots in there, they are meant for more medium to long range types of combat. But when you're actually using both of these weapons, I highly recommend that you aim for your enemy's upper chest. And the reason why I say this is that if they're like 20 meters away from you, 20 to 30 meters out, if you aim for their upper chest, because of the way that the recoil pattern works on these weapons, you don't have to deal with a whole lot of horizontal, which makes them so amazing, is that when you hold down the trigger for about 2 seconds, because of the recoil pattern and because of that substantial amount of vertical recoil, you'll get 2 shots into their upper chest, and then the last shot will probably get a dome piece on in there. And so you'll get an incredible amount of headshots with this weapon if you incorporate that type of playstyle into your gameplay. Like when I'm running around with this, I feel like a headshot machine. I am getting them all over the place, and that's probably the reason why to unlock the AR160, you have to get, I think, 20 headshots with assault rifles in the game. And while normally that would take a while if you're using all the other assault rifles, if you actually use the L85A2 to unlock the AR160, and as long as you let the weapon basically do all the work for you and you aim for their upper chest, you're gonna get headshots all over the place. And it's easily one of the best aspects of both of these weapons. But as for actually deciding on which one of these is the better assault rifle, I would say that the AR160 is going to be your preferred long to medium range weapon. Because it does have a slightly lower RPM, I know that 50 isn't a dramatic difference, but because it is slightly lower, I just find that it struggles a lot more in those types of combat scenarios. But at medium to long range, because of, in my opinion, the preferred reload speed, the preferred recoil pattern, it just dominates people in those circumstances. Like, this weapon is so much fun, especially if you use a little trick where you aim at their upper chest, you're gonna get headshots all day long. But as for the L85A2, I would say that this is a more consistent and well-rounded weapon. Like, you can pretty much perform in any type of combat scenario. Its RPM is decent enough where you can do well up close. It's got the recoil pattern to dominate at medium to long range. It's got that amazing first shot recoil. Its reload speed is on the high end, and I would say that that's probably the biggest drawback of the L85A2. It's still easily one of my favorite weapons in the game. Like, before the patch, it was a dominant force on the battlefield. Like, 800 rounds per minute, amazing recoil pattern. Like, it was just a fantastic gun and dominated pretty much in every single type of combat scenario. And while that strength has been lessened slightly because they did reduce that RPM from 800 to 750, I still think it's a phenomenal weapon. And at least for me, while I still love the AR160, because I like to play a little bit more aggressively, I like to get into those tight-knit type of combat scenarios, I prefer the L85A2. So if you would like to use both of these weapons and you would like to be a dominant force on the battlefield, I do have a couple of customization recommendations that will improve their performance slightly. And so for the first slot, the optics, I was mainly just sticking with the red dot sight. The RDS in the game are basically my bread and butter on all the weapons, but if you would like to use a higher optic like the ACOG scope, go for it. You will probably have to tap fire a little bit more because of their high vertical recoil if you hold down the trigger, but as long as you tap fire, you're going to have no problem taking out people at medium to long range. As for the accessory, this is really going to come down to whatever tickles your fancy. I was either using nothing at all or the laser sight for a little bit more added hipfire accuracy, but because these really aren't meant for running and gunning all that much, it pretty much just comes down to whatever you want. I find this to be one of the more useless slots in the game, at least for weapon customization, so whatever you like, go for it. The barrel attachments is where we get a couple more options, and it really just comes down to if you're struggling with one key aspect of the weapon, and that is the vertical recoil. If you can't stand the vertical recoil, you think it's a little bit too high, then I would slap on the muzzle brake. It is going to decrease your accuracy at a distance. Like, the muzzle brake, if you hold down the trigger, it will make you a little bit more inaccurate, but if you can't hit anything because of the recoil itself, it doesn't matter what your accuracy or the bullet spread of the weapon is. If you can't manage it, then it's a useless weapon. So if you are struggling with the vertical recoil, then I would slap on the muzzle brake. But what I was actually using was the flash hider. I realize it doesn't give you any long range killing potential. It doesn't make it so that you stay off the minimap like the suppressor. All it does is make it a little bit harder for the enemy to identify where you are. But if you're not going to use any of the other attachments, why not use it? It doesn't have any negative aspect to it. It doesn't hinder you at all. And so, at least for a lot of the footage that you guys saw today, I was just using the flash hider. And then for the final slot, the underbarrels, I would say that this goes to the ergo grip. I know that some people just assume and equate this to being a close encounter attachment because it increases your hipfire accuracy by 50%, but you also have to remember that it increases your aim down sight accuracy by 50% when you are on the move. That is a huge bonus, and if you're anyone like me who likes to move around a lot when they're firing and you like to be on the move and you like to make yourself a harder target, then the Ergo Grip is just a phenomenal attachment. But that is about it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think so far of the AR160 and the nerf to the L85. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Let me know down below in the comment section. But until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.